Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring. Joining me on today's show is former Assistant Phoenix Police Chief and one of my colleagues serving District 6 on the Phoenix City Council, Phoenix Councilman Kevin Robinson. Kevin, thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. We're really grateful that you're here because there's a lot to discuss that I thought you, with your history, as we just said, you used to be Assistant Police Chief, so you're in your first year on the council, but we knew each other back in the day.
Yes.
When you were the second in command in the Phoenix Police Department. I want to get your thoughts. You obviously had a almost 37-year career with the department, so you saw it from all levels. And going back also, if you'll forgive me, an extended period of time. You started in 1980, so you've seen a lot of changes in policing as a whole, Phoenix as a whole, and then the department as a whole. And you want to walk us through that just a little bit?
Certainly. You know, ironically enough, I graduated from the academy. It was 43 years ago on December 19th, 1980. So had an anniversary just recently. And policing was different back then. It just was. The police department wasn't clearly as large as it is. It wasn't as diverse as it is. A lot more women now than there was then. So the department changed along with the times, along with the city. Because I remember in downtown Phoenix, there was a time when you could shoot a cannon after 4 o'clock, 4:30 at night, you wouldn't hit anything. And now, as robust as it is, it requires police services and such. But going back a little bit and talking about policing, how it used to be, you know, some things changed and some things stayed the same, but it was different. It was different from the standpoint of the types of calls we received. You didn't have as much violence back then as you see now, and that's unfortunate, and for whatever reasons, you know, it could be because of an increase in population, just all of those types of things. We saw those types of things, but not with the frequency we see it now. So that was different. Policing back then, I remember being praised by my peers, the senior peers that I worked with, senior police officers. You would get praise from them when you were able to settle a situation without, number one, raising your voice, without using force, without pulling out your gun. That was considered and viewed as a way of conducting real policing.
Do you feel like there was more respect for police then? Because that may factor in. I know we've had an uptick in violence against officers here in the last few years, but I don't have obviously the long history to compare it to like you do.
Well, yes, the easy answer is yes. You didn't see the open disregard for authority that you may see more often now than you did back then, but we saw it back then. And, you know, obviously we're going back over 40 years, but you didn't have what I think is, you know, almost it's almost a constant type of thing every once in a while toward policing. I could remember when the police showed up, everyone stopped, they listened, there was a level of respect that was given. And over time, and I think we have to equate some of that to what has happened in a lot of other places with policing. And, you know, that has had a profound impact on law enforcement around the country. May not have happened here in Phoenix, but it may have happened somewhere else, and it's that painting with a very broad brush that law enforcement has had to deal with.
Yeah. And then, so starting in 1980, I'm going to guess that you didn't start off as assistant chief. So,
No.
So maybe walk us through a little bit about your steps along the way and your rise to the top ranks, and you know what you saw along the way too.
Okay, certainly. And you know, like I said, graduated from the academy in December of 1980. Hit the streets. I was working out of the 700 precinct. Then now it's the Mountain View precinct. So I worked there. I was trained. You go through a training process. So I spent about 8 weeks on days with a training officer, and then another 4 weeks or so on an afternoon shift with a training officer. Then I was cut loose. I was a solo capable police officer after about 10, 12 weeks of training, I believe, back then. And as a solo capable officer, I rode a beat by myself and such. So I worked out of the 700 precinct there for about the first 6 years of my career. Enjoyed the heck out of it. Mostly the midnight shift. It's when what we thought all the action happened, and had a really good time. Decided I wanted to promote up through the organization. I took the sergeant's test, and I was successful there, got promoted to sergeant.
Can I interrupt to ask a question there? So about promotion. Did people seek you out? Did you seek it out? Was it a combination of the two?
It was
or were you
a
kind of on your own?
No, it was a combination of the two. I just wanted to be a very good police officer because there was just so much fun in that. And I tell people nowadays that being a police officer, you get total satisfaction each and every day because you know you're going to help people. You know that. You know that for a fact. You go home at the end of the day knowing you help folks. You're going to put people in jail and all those types of things, but more than anything else, you're going to help folks along the way. So I was truly enjoying that. I was able to see myself having at least a 20-year career as a police officer. But then I started looking around and I came to the conclusion I could have as much of an impact, if not more, as a sergeant. I can have that impact on other officers. And during my time as a police officer, I was a training officer. I was assigned to the training academy to teach and to counsel a new academy class, but still,
So you had a
going back to
varied 6
patrol.
years
I
when you
did.
started, yeah.
Yeah, not just in patrol. Had a chance to move around a little bit. I was tapped a couple times to work some undercover operations for homicide and the special assignments unit, which, it required sitting in a van watching people for an extended period of time in the middle of summer when it's really hot. It's not as glamorous as you see on television, but I enjoyed doing that. So yes, my officer career had a lot of opportunities within it. So I took the sergeant's exam. I was fortunate enough to get promoted, and I went to the South Mountain Precinct as a brand new sergeant down there, working with South Central cruisers. Cruising was a big deal back then, and the precinct was different.
And at that point, how many people are you overseeing?
My first squad, I had 6 people, but at one point I was a training squad sergeant in the South Mountain Precinct, and I had an 18-person squad. Those numbers are long gone. I don't know that we'll ever see that again. And it was busy for me because there was a lot of paperwork to do, but it was also very satisfying because I was able to help mentor and bring police officers along, help them in their careers. Ironically enough, some of the folks that I had on that training squad went on to, one of them was Heston Silbert, who went on to be Department of Public Safety director. So, Heston was a great guy. He just did good things. But you had those opportunities to really see in other folks what some folks saw in me, and that you knew they had that leadership capability. And it goes back to answer that one question. I took the sergeant's exam because I felt that I could do a good job at it, and others saw something in me and encouraged me to go into the promotional process. So it was a combination of both things. So I was fortunate enough. I was a South Side sergeant, worked not just patrol, but I was a training squad sergeant. Then I was tasked with being a walking beat sergeant. You have a group of officers working housing projects. Back then we had the homeless shelter. So I had functional responsibility over the shelter services, over all the housing projects in South Phoenix, and it was a lot of fun.
Were the precincts bigger areas, physical areas back
Yes,
then?
we didn't have as many as you have now. Back then I think we had, you had 400, 500, 6, 7, and 8. So you just had the 5 patrol precincts.
It was a much smaller population, but physically the city was still big.
Exactly.
So you had a lot of space to cover, is my point.
Really did, and it was a lot. It was a lot. It was a lot of fun. You didn't have all the freeways, developed out the way you do now. So there's a lot of driving on surface streets and stuff, getting around and such.
I remember I moved here in 1991. The 10 didn't go through.
Yes, that's true. And so if you had to go somewhere in a police car, you just took the long way, sort of. But then I was a sergeant on South Side for several years, and I remember I was working. I was a field training squad sergeant. Everything was perfect. I had actually just taken a interview process to go out to our training academy as a training squad sergeant, which is what I really wanted to do. Again, helping to train and bring new officers along. And I got a call in the middle of the afternoon where the radio cleared me and asked me to call to the chief's office. And I thought, what did I do wrong? You don't go down to the chief's office or call the chief's office. And I called the number. They said, yeah, Chief Ortega and Chief Oliver want to see you. And Chief Ortega was the chief of the organization at the time. Jerry Oliver was one of the assistant chiefs over the investigations division. And I thought, this can't be good.
I assume this story has a happy ending, or you wouldn't be telling it.
Yeah,
but I have to say, they don't give you any hint that you're not in trouble.
Not at all. I was just asked
It seems a little bit like hazing to me. But
it was. I was asked to come downtown right away. And I wasn't too far away. I was down at 7th Avenue and Buckeye Road, so I got down there pretty quickly. Went up to the chief's office, and I was asked to go right back to Chief Ortega's office. I walked in there, and Chief Ortega and Chief Oliver were sitting there, and I said, I'm Kevin Robinson. You guys want to see me? And they said, yes. And Chief Oliver said, how would you like to be the spokesman for the Phoenix Police Department? And very politely, I said, no, thank you. I'm slated to go out to the training academy as a training squad sergeant.
You hadn't done that kind of work before either.
No, I had not. Didn't know. Never in front of a camera, nothing along those lines. I wanted to go out to the academy and be a class sergeant. And Chief Oliver said, Kevin, let me ask you the question one more time, and this time, let's see if you can get it right. He said, how would you like to be the spokesman for the Phoenix Police Department? I said, I would love to be the spokesman for the Phoenix Police Department. He said, great, you start Monday. And that was the start of my career for 5.5 years as a spokesman for the police department, which gave me the insight to the organization, to the city, how it worked. It provided me a tremendous opportunity.
Probably a background on a lot of the investigations because you had to go explain them.
Exactly. I did just that, interacted with the county attorney's office, the county attorney's office, the attorney general's office, you name it, any investigative detail or any prosecuting body, anybody along those lines I interacted with. So it was a lot of fun.
Well, and happy news, this experience probably helped you in your current role.
It did. I can't,
even up to and including perhaps this show.
Yes.
Used to cameras.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable in front of a camera. So I did that for a few years, which I truly enjoyed. Was promoted to lieutenant out of there. Went back to patrol. Loved that midnight shift. I was a shift commander working from 6 o'clock at night until 5 o'clock in the morning, so it was just a great time to be out there, again, having an opportunity to have an impact on not just the officers, but with the citizens and on people we interacted with. So I had a wonderful time at that. I moved from patrol finally after several years into an administrative assignment, and I went to the Planning and Research Bureau as our operations lieutenant for the police department, and it was as exciting as it sounds. But I was in charge of all the planning for the police department and a great deal of exposure to the police chiefs and the commanders and people here at City Hall. So there were a lot of opportunities there. After a while, I moved over to internal affairs for a short amount of time as an inspections lieutenant, which was fun. So I had a great deal of diversity in assignments within the police department.
Is that pretty standard if you're an officer and you start moving up the ranks that you do different stuff?
It is, because you want to have a broad perspective. You want to know how other things work, how people look at things, and what their perspective may happen to be. When I was the operations lieutenant in our Planning and Research Bureau, I had to write city council reports all the time. So you had a real good feel for those things. Had a good feel for folks over here in the council offices, for the mayor's office, the city manager's office. So I worked with all of those groups with a great deal of regularity. Then after a while, I decided, it was time. I went into our commander's process and was promoted to commander. Was assigned to the Maryville precinct. I grew up out in West Side, where I went to high school out there at Trevor Brown High School. So I knew West Side. I had always wanted to work that area of town. Had a chance to go out there. I did.
So you kind of got your dream job.
I really did. And I thought, this is it. I can stay here for a very long time, and was enjoying myself. I truly was. But then got a call one afternoon, same type of thing. Chief wants to talk to you. And I'm thinking, what went wrong? What's going on? And I had an inkling what it was about. I knew there was going to be some movement within the organization, some transfers. And I just assumed I was being transferred to another assignment. Word had been I was probably going over to the city manager's office as the commander assigned to that detail. So I was ready for it. I loved being in a precinct. It was a great deal of fun interacting with the community. But I was told I was being promoted to assistant chief. And so from that point,
so you weren't expecting that?
Was not expecting it.
Did your jaw hit the floor?
It did more than that. It's
a big responsibility and a big job.
It was. I firmly believe I was in a state of shock for the first several hours after hearing that and thinking I was dreaming. But I was assigned the South Patrol Division, which was very busy at the time. And again, had an opportunity to prove myself, to get out there and work with not just the officers, the sergeants, lieutenants, and the commanders, but the other assistant chiefs, the police chief, the city manager, the assistant city manager, and the deputy city managers, all the council offices. So it gave me a perspective that I sort of had, but I didn't have. It's at a much larger level.
You
at
also
that
went
point.
from just yourself and then 6 people or 18 up and up
Yep.
to all of a sudden now you got hundreds, if not thousands,
That's
plus
exactly
a budget probably at that time, a couple $100 million or
It
something?
was,
Yeah.
and you had to focus and deal with all those types of things. So each time you go up the organization, you do take on a greater area of
Almost seems
responsibility.
exponential when you look at it from the
Exactly.
outside.
Everything goes up. The number of people you supervise, the size of the budget you're responsible for, as well as the level of responsibility that you have. My phone always rang in the middle of the night. You had to get up and go, and I enjoyed it. Enjoyed the heck
Do
out
they
of
let
it.
you turn the phone off on vacations? I've
On
always wondered.
vacations, that's about the only time. You know, you get someone to cover for you. But as an assistant chief, I had an opportunity to oversee not just patrol at one time. We'd rotate every few years. So I was in patrol. I had the investigations division, during which time we were faced with, the city of Phoenix was faced with 3 of the largest investigations we had ever run into. The baseline killer, we had the serial shooters, and the AM rapists. And looking back on things, I was fortunate enough to oversee each of those investigations, but I had tremendous folks working for me. You know, they did the heavy lifting. I was there to get them the resources they needed to do their jobs effectively. All 3 of those major investigations came to successful conclusions, and I was glad to have a small part in each and every one of those. So I did all that. I had investigations. I had the budget for a while. I had administrative services. I had the technical services division. So in my time as an assistant chief, I worked in virtually every part of the Phoenix Police Department.
And if I might speculate, probably a lot of the functions that you performed maybe wouldn't have been something you would have possibly envisioned when you were a 20-something applying to the department.
No, I was 21 years old when I hit the streets, and no, in my wildest imaginations did I ever think I would go that route. I just never did. And it worked out for me. I always wanted to be a police officer. If my mother were alive, she would tell you I used to watch Adam 12 and Dragnet and those shows. And to her chagrin, I said early on, I want to be a police officer. You know, it's not something she wanted for her little boy. But it turned into, for me...
But I bet she's happy you got to live your dream.
Yes, she is.
I would be
yeah.
as a parent. I'd
Yeah.
be excited about that.
I was able to do just that. I lived my dream. I was able to do all the things I wanted to. And after 36 and a half years, I was really ready. I was ready because you see a lot. You know, the best thing about policing, and I tell this because I teach at ASU these days as well in the criminal justice program, I tell my students what you get out of a career in law enforcement is an opportunity to, number 1, make lifelong friends. And number 2, just as important, you have a chance to help people every single day. And I firmly believe I was able to do that. So the job satisfaction that went with being a police officer, I would put it up against anything, any other career. I think the only thing that really equals it in my mind is either being a teacher or being a firefighter. Because you do, you know, you help folks, you develop them, you bring them along, and quite honestly, you make our community better.
Well, and you know, your positivity after almost 37 years, where you must have seen some bad stuff and seen some of the worst of human behavior, is really impressive, I would say. You know, your mindset about it, and you get that. Obviously, our offices are right by each other, so we see each other just on a day-to-day basis. You know, I've always noticed that you're always upbeat and always like friendly. You're not the hard-bitten detective from Hill Street Blues or something.
Yeah.
You're definitely positive, and I think that's fantastic. At a time where it's getting harder to get young people to want to be police officers. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, like you said, you wanted to be one, but like what went into that? What did you do for the couple of years out of high school before you could get into the academy as maybe a template for maybe a young person watching at home?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's a great question, and I welcome the opportunity because I'm always trying to encourage folks to go into law enforcement. Because, like I said, I tell folks it's the one career that you know you're going to help somebody every single day. And there are the downsides. You know, we were just mentioning that a little bit. You're going to see the worst that people have to offer sometimes. But you can also be that point in time in people's lives. You can be that person that helps turn things a different way. But I went to college, and between my junior and senior year, I thought it would take some time to get hired. The Phoenix Police Department jumped on me right away, and to tell a long-held secret. I wasn't going to graduate from college on time. I had failed a couple of classes that my folks weren't aware of, and so I was like trying to figure out how do I, what am I going to do? How do I, make up these classes and stuff? And so I was able to talk my folks into letting me take a hiatus between my junior and senior year, and I went back and finished, and everything was good. Then went on to get my master's degree and everything. But
gainful employment is always the great elixir.
Yes, it was. Yes, I think they looked at it that way. So I was gainfully employed at an early age. But what I tell people is, and most law enforcement agencies want people to have a little bit of life experience. Get a job. Get out of high school. If you don't want to go to college, find a job. Some people go into the military. I tell people to find something that they enjoy doing, until which time they can.
Excellent life advice for everybody.
It really
right?
is. Enjoy what you're doing. Don't go into something and not be satisfied with it. And then apply to the police department, because you can do that when you're about 20 and a half years old, because sometimes the process takes a while. Look for that opportunity. Look for the police department that fits you. It may be a small department, maybe a very large department. I think one of the best departments around is the Phoenix Police Department. What it has to offer, and the opportunities within the organization.
And that's always been the reputation, and recruiting had never really been an issue until the last maybe 3 or 4 years.
The last few years, and it's an issue across the nation, not just with the Phoenix Police Department, because policing has taken a significant hit.
But it is. We were, I don't want to say set in our ways or whatever, we didn't have to try that hard to get excellent recruits, frankly, like yourself, and certainly over time. But now we got to hustle.
It is. We do.
It's a different environment.
Different environment, different generation, and folks, they're used to, in some cases, working from home, doing some things like that are more conducive to their lifestyles. But I tell people, you want to be outside, you want to be in the fresh air, you want to do those types of things.
Don't tell them about the long stakeouts and the hot vans.
Oh, this is true.
Skip those stories.
It was still fun. But
you were the PIO guy. I don't want to tell you your business, but we'll skip that story.
But you're right. I try to make sure folks understand whether they have a college degree, they're in college, get some kind of life experience. If you're out of high school, you don't feel like college, or it's not for you, get a job, enjoy it, wait for the opportunity to go into policing. But while you're doing that, I tell folks, watch how you drive. Because that can be an issue that you have a problem with when getting hired. Drugs and alcohol. I don't have to tell folks, it's a dead end. I strongly encourage folks to not even experiment with things. I never did. It was just, but I grew up on military bases. My dad was in the military. You didn't dare do that because your dad would get in trouble, not just you. So that wasn't something that was in the equation for us. But I tell folks, look for an opportunity to get to a point where you are a desired, commodity for a police department. And it's not hard to do. Police departments are looking for good folks. And I tell folks that I can teach a good person to be a great police officer. You can't teach a bad person to be a good police officer. So, there's some friction there, obviously. But I tell folks to think about a career where you're constantly helping people.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that's what you do. And
we're going to put you in the recruiting posters. This is perfect.
And that's one of the things I really want to take advantage of now, being on the city council.
Well, on the public safety committee.
Exactly.
I mean, your advice, obviously, we all hang on your words about such things because you lived it for almost 40 years.
Yeah, and it truly is a rewarding career. And a lot of people think about their futures, as they should. There's still a great retirement program attached to the to work in law enforcement. You don't see that in a lot of other industry and a lot of other businesses. So I ask folks to look at the long run, look at things, as a totality.
Which,
not
as it
just
has
here
always
and now.
been, is a struggle to get that across to people in their early 20s.
It
would
is.
have been a struggle to get it to me in my early 20s.
And it was with me, but I look back on it now, and I'm glad I did all the things that I did when I was in my 20s and in my 30s. It really made an opportunity for me to retire and pretty much do anything I want to do. I chose to, continue or to teach and then go into politics. But there are opportunities out there in law enforcement. And to give you an example, you can go to work with the Phoenix Police Department, and you can change assignments every 3 years. You can work some detective assignment. You can go to the special assignments of the SWAT team. You can go to the air support unit and learn how to fly helicopters. You can go to the human resources portion within the police department and deal with police officers who struggle with issues, as peer counseling and things like that, because you do see a lot as a police officer. But there are so many different assignments. If you switched every 3 years and retired after 30 years, you'd only get to about 10 or so assignments. You're just scratching the surface.
You'd also kind of know 10 distinct jobs.
Exactly.
That makes you marketable for what comes next, because by then, if you start in your early 20s, you're only in your early 50s.
That's right, and an opportunity to go out and do all kinds of other things. So that's what I want people to understand about a career in law enforcement, specifically with the City of Phoenix and the Phoenix Police Department. It's a large police department, the 5th largest city in the nation. It has won accolades from across the board in all kinds of things that it does and has done and continues to do. So there's plenty of opportunity, and that's what I want folks to understand, because all of us wants to belong to an organization that we can be proud of. That when you're out with friends or at a party or something, say, yeah, I work for the Phoenix Police Department. When I do that, or when I was a police officer, and when I tell people now that I was with the Phoenix Police Department, it turns heads. People always want to come over and they want to talk and ask questions. So I think people, they really appreciate the work that people do in law enforcement. And so the men and women out there who wear that uniform and carry that badge, they're doing a tremendous amount of work, and they have a tremendous amount of respect from folks, and I hope they really understand that.
Well, obviously, you now, but me for a longer period of time have dealt with a lot of people called voters, and you get feedback. They tell you, we're sort of like a complaint department. We also are in some cases a praise department. And if I had to pick one thing over my career that has been positively commented upon, it would be police and the military. People definitely feel good about United States Armed Forces. They definitely feel good about their police department, and that comes up a lot. Obviously, you won your election, so it's probably helpful there. But I always feel bad for the officers, because they hear the smaller group of folks who are anti-police, who tend to come to our meetings.
Right.
We just got a dose of that a couple weeks ago, and they have a right to their opinion. But it should be known that that is not the opinion, I think, that is broadly held by most Phoenicians.
Right.
And it sounds like you've experienced that.
I have. It's not the majority of opinion. It is a small minority, and folks need to understand that. And you mentioned something during my campaigning and such. I was talking to a group of folks, and this gentleman moved up next to me, and it's an interesting story. He moved up and he stood there until I finished having a conversation. When I did, I turned to him. I said, "Hi, I'm Kevin Robinson." He says, "I know exactly who you are." He reaches out and shakes my hand, and he doesn't let go of my hand, and he's still talking and says, "You arrested me." Yeah, exactly. And he gave me the date, September 18th or whatever it was, 1984. He remembered everything about it. He told me where the arrest took place on East Indian School Road, and he's still shaking my hand and won't let loose. And I'm thinking, this is not good.
Yeah.
This is somebody who's mad. And it wasn't. He said, "I want to tell you, you saved my life." I arrested him for drunk driving, and he was explaining to me that how I treated him that evening. That I was respectful, but I told him, "Is this how you want to go through life?" Went through a host of things like that with him. And he said, "I remembered that." He said, "You booked me into jail."
Still remember that almost 40 years later.
He did. And
obviously he wasn't maybe in his best frame of mind that night either, so it penetrated.
It did.
That's amazing.
And I tell people that. I said, you will make a difference in people's lives that will be lifelong for them, and you won't know it, but you're out there doing really good work. And so to anybody who is considering a career in law enforcement, I wholeheartedly endorse them, or I encourage them to do so, simply because it will be a rewarding career, no doubt.
Well, that's an incredible story. I had meant to ask you, and sadly we're out of time, about the Department of Justice investigation, but as I sit and reflect on it, I think this is deserving of a two-parter. So if you're willing, when that all kind of comes down, I'd love to get your thoughts, obviously, from your history of the department and your analysis of wherever that leads. So perhaps we'll leave that for next time. I got kind of wrapped up in your personal story, so I'm glad that filled the time, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Really grateful that you came on, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it.
Really enjoyed it. And if you have any questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445. If you've been arrested by Kevin, call his office. And if you would like to send any messages online, at Phoenix.gov/District 2. And we look forward to seeing you next time on Issues.